If you stop this vehicle, you'll stop something far bigger than me." The words were calm, almost quiet, but they disappeared beneath the sharp burst of red and blue lights washing across the rain-soaked highway just outside Richmond, Virginia. Marcus Ellison eased his dark gray SUV onto the shoulder without hesitation, his hands resting loosely on the steering wheel as windshield wipers swept away the steady drizzle one rhythm at a time. The dashboard clock read 8:42 p.m. A secure message still glowed on the navigation display. Federal witness transport. 18 minutes to extraction. Every second mattered now, yet Marcus showed no trace of panic. 20 years in federal service had taught him that calm often carried more strength than urgency. He watched the patrol cruiser settle behind him, its headlights cutting through the mist, while another city police unit rolled in from the opposite lane, quietly boxing him in before anyone had asked a single question. Rain tapped softly against the roof as passing traffic slowed, curious drivers stealing quick glances at what already looked like another routine traffic stop. But there was nothing routine about tonight. Hidden behind the rear privacy glass sat a frightened federal witness whose identity could never be exposed, someone whose testimony would soon decide the future of a nationwide criminal investigation. Marcus could not reveal that. He could not explain why every minute lost placed years of undercover work at risk. He could only wait and hope the officers outside followed procedure before assumptions. Officer Ryan Cooper stepped out first, adjusting his reflective vest as water rolled from the brim of his patrol cap. Young, confident, and eager to prove himself, he approached with the certainty of someone convinced he had already figured out the story before hearing the first sentence. His flashlight swept across the SUV, lingering on Marcus's face just long enough for silent judgments to settle into place. Another officer circled toward the passenger side while a third remained near the cruiser, speaking into a shoulder radio. The highway suddenly felt much smaller. Marcus lowered his window halfway, allowing the cool evening air to drift inside. "Good evening, officer," he said politely. "How can I help you?" Ryan ignored the question. "License. Registration. Keep both hands where I can see them." Marcus nodded without argument. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed. He understood exactly how quickly ordinary encounters could become complicated when tension replaced communication. His wallet remained in his jacket pocket beside a federal credential he had no intention of displaying unless absolutely necessary. The mission required discretion above everything else. He glanced briefly toward the rearview mirror. The witness remained completely still, following every instruction Marcus had given before they entered the city limits. "Stay quiet. Stay unseen. Trust me." Those words now echoed in Marcus's thoughts as loudly as the rain striking the pavement. Ryan examined the driver's license with narrowed eyes before shining his flashlight back into the cabin. "Where are you headed tonight, Mr. Ellison?" Marcus answered honestly without revealing the truth. "I'm traveling on official business." Ryan's expression barely changed. If anything, the answer seemed to confirm whatever suspicion had already formed in his mind. The flashing lights reflected across the wet asphalt like fractured ribbons of red and blue stretching endlessly into the darkness, while the countdown on Marcus's dashboard quietly continued, 17 minutes remaining, and somewhere beyond the storm, people were waiting for a witness who could not afford to arrive even 1 minute too late. Marcus reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, never taking his eyes off Officer Ryan Cooper. Every movement was measured to the inch, the kind of discipline built through decades of training and countless moments where patience accomplished more than authority ever could. He carefully removed his wallet, opened it just enough to retrieve his driver's license, and placed it on the edge of the lowered window without making any sudden motion. Ryan accepted it with a skeptical glance before stepping back toward his patrol cruiser. The rain continued to fall in soft waves, coating the highway in shimmering reflections that turned every passing headlight into a streak of silver. Inside the vehicle, the silence remained almost sacred. Marcus resisted the urge to look over his shoulder, even though he knew exactly what sat behind the rear privacy partition. A frightened federal witness waited quietly, trusting a man who had spent more than 20 years protecting people whose names could never appear in newspapers. Marcus had escorted judges threatened by organized crime, children scheduled to testify against violent gangs, and witnesses whose courage had rewritten entire investigations. Tonight was no different, except for one dangerous detail. Tom was slipping away. The digital clock on the dashboard rolled forward another minute. 16 minutes remained before the secure extraction team reached the designated meeting point nearly 12 miles away. Missing that window could force everyone to abandon months of preparation. Marcus understood the consequences better than anyone, yet the mission protocol remained absolute. He could not reveal the witness. He could not identify the operation. He could not compromise federal security simply because an ordinary traffic stop had become unexpectedly complicated. Ryan returned carrying the driver's license, his expression noticeably colder than before. "Step out of the vehicle," he said firmly. Marcus gave a small nod. "Officer, before I do that, I respectfully request that you contact Federal Dispatch. They will verify everything you need." Ryan folded his arms across his rain jacket. "I asked you to step out of the vehicle, not tell me how to do my job." Marcus did not argue. He slowly opened the driver's door and stepped onto the wet shoulder, allowing the cool evening air to settle around him. Water soaked into his polished black shoes as tractor-trailers rushed past, sending gusts of wind across the highway. Another officer moved closer while quietly studying Marcus from head to toe. His tailored jacket, calm posture, and steady voice seemed almost out of place against the growing tension surrounding the stop. Ryan looked him over again. "Official business," he repeated with a faint smile that carried more doubt than amusement. "Everybody says that when they want special treatment." Marcus met his eyes without raising his voice. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for proper verification." Ryan ignored the request and glanced toward the rear of the sport utility vehicle. "Is anyone else inside?" Marcus answered carefully. "There is someone under my protection." Ryan's eyebrows lifted immediately. "Then I definitely need to know who that is." Marcus paused for only a second before replying. "I cannot disclose that information here." The answer settled over the roadside like another layer of rain. Ryan took a slow step backward and rested one hand near his duty belt while signaling to the other officers with a subtle motion. Their posture changed almost instantly. Marcus noticed it without reacting. Around them, more drivers slowed as they passed, curious about the flashing lights reflecting across the highway. Somewhere beneath the steady rhythm of rain and distant traffic, the dashboard clock inside the unattended vehicle continued its silent countdown, and 15 minutes remained. Ryan Cooper held Marcus Ellison's driver's license a little longer than necessary, turning it over once before slipping it into his jacket pocket instead of handing it back. Rainwater rolled from the edge of his cap as he studied the man standing quietly beside the sport utility vehicle. There was no nervous pacing, no raised voice, no attempt to argue. Marcus simply stood with his hands visible, shoulders relaxed, and eyes steady despite the cold wind sweeping across the highway. That composure unsettled Ryan more than anger ever could. Most drivers complained within seconds. Most demanded explanations. Marcus did neither. "You keep saying this is official business," Ryan said. "Official for who?" Marcus answered in the same measured tone he had used from the beginning. "I am not refusing to cooperate. I am asking that you verify my identity through the appropriate federal channel." Ryan shook his head. "You can tell me that after we finish our investigation." Another officer, Emily Sanders, walked over carrying a flashlight and quietly asked, "Do you want me to run the vehicle identification number again?" Ryan nodded. "Do it." Emily circled the front of the vehicle while Marcus listened without interruption. The steady rain softened every sound except the distant rumble of passing tractor-trailers. Inside the vehicle, everything remained still. Marcus knew the person seated in the rear had followed every instruction perfectly. Silence was now as important as any protective equipment. He could almost hear the clock continuing its relentless countdown inside the dashboard. Every passing minute narrowed the margin for success, yet revealing the purpose of the mission would violate the oath he had taken years earlier. That oath had never depended on convenience. It depended on discipline. Ryan looked back toward Marcus. "Why can you not tell me who is in your vehicle?" Marcus answered honestly while protecting the information entrusted to him. "Because someone else's safety depends on that privacy." Ryan let out a quiet breath. "That sounds convenient." Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he watched raindrops collect on the hood before sliding away into the darkness. Finally, he spoke. "Officer, every decision I make tonight affects more than myself. Please contact Federal Dispatch. They will answer your questions. Emily returned a moment later, lowering her flashlight. The registration comes back clean, she reported. Vehicle ownership matches the license. Ryan frowned slightly, but remained unconvinced. Clean paperwork did not erase the doubts already forming in his mind. He glanced toward the dark rear windows once more, searching for movement that never came. Around them, the flashing emergency lights reflected across the wet pavement like ribbons stretching into the distance. Drivers slowed as they passed, curious but unaware that the quiet roadside conversation had become far more significant than anyone could see. Marcus remained exactly where he was, calm enough that his breathing barely disturbed the cool evening air. He knew experience often required accepting misunderstandings without allowing frustration to take control. Somewhere beyond the rain, a federal team was preparing to receive the protected witness. Somewhere ahead, a carefully planned operation continued to depend on a schedule that could not be delayed forever. Marcus silently hoped that the next decision made on this roadside would be guided by procedure instead of assumption. Ryan Cooper looked toward the 2nd Patrol Unit and gave a small nod. The two officers moved closer to the sport utility vehicle, their boots splashing through shallow pools of rainwater collecting along the shoulder. Marcus Ellison remained exactly where he stood, hands visible, posture relaxed, watching every movement without resistance. The highway hummed with the steady rhythm of passing traffic, each stream of headlights briefly illuminating the scene before disappearing into the darkness. Somewhere inside the vehicle, the digital clock continued its silent countdown. 14 minutes remained. Marcus understood that every passing second narrowed the carefully planned window for the transfer, yet he refused to let urgency replace judgment. "Officer Cooper," he said evenly, "I am asking once more that you contact Federal Dispatch before taking any further action. They can confirm everything you need within minutes." Ryan met his gaze without answering immediately. Rain trickled from the edge of his cap as he glanced toward the dark rear windows again. "If this is legitimate," he finally replied, "verification can wait until we finish our investigation." Marcus drew a slow breath. "Respectfully, it cannot." The words were simple, free of frustration or accusation, but their quiet certainty lingered in the damp evening air. Officer Emily Sanders looked between the two men before speaking carefully. "Ryan, registration is clean, insurance is current, and nothing is coming back stolen." Ryan folded his arms. "That does not explain why he refuses to identify his passenger." Marcus answered before Emily could respond. "I am protecting someone's privacy under federal authority. That responsibility does not disappear because I am standing on the side of a highway." Ryan's expression hardened. "You keep talking about federal authority, but you have not shown me anything proving it." Marcus knew the credential resting inside his wallet could answer that question instantly. He also knew displaying it openly beside a protected witness and multiple bystanders would violate the very security procedures he had sworn to uphold. Experience had taught him that following protocol was often inconvenient, but never optional. "There is a secure process for verification," Marcus said. "Please use it." A long silence followed. Wind carried the scent of wet pavement across the roadside while emergency lights painted shifting bands of red and blue across the polished surface of the vehicle. Several passing drivers slowed enough to watch before continuing down the interstate, unaware that the quiet disagreement unfolding beneath the rain involved far more than an ordinary traffic stop. Ryan finally turned toward one of the officers. "I want the vehicle checked." Emily hesitated for a brief moment before walking toward the passenger side. Marcus did not interfere. He simply watched, trusting that professionalism would eventually overcome assumption. His eyes drifted for an instant toward the windshield where faint reflections from the dashboard clock shimmered against the glass. 13 minutes remained. Somewhere ahead, a federal team was waiting at a secure location, expecting a vehicle that had never missed a scheduled transfer. Marcus remained calm despite the tightening timeline. His responsibility extended beyond his own reputation. It belonged to the frightened witness sitting quietly behind the privacy partition, to every investigator who had spent months preparing this operation, and to the promise he had made long ago that every person placed under his protection would be treated with dignity until they reached safety. Emily Sanders stopped beside the rear passenger door and looked through the dark privacy glass. but the steady rain and muted interior lighting revealed almost nothing. She turned back toward Ryan Cooper with uncertainty written across her face. "I cannot see anyone clearly," she said quietly. Ryan walked over without answering, his flashlight tracing slow circles across the windows before reflecting back into his own eyes. "Open the rear compartment," he instructed. Marcus Ellison remained composed, though the words settled heavily in the cool night air. "Officer," he said with calm conviction, "I respectfully ask you not to do that until Federal Dispatch has been contacted. There is still time to verify everything properly." Ryan looked at him with growing impatience. "You keep saying there is still time. Time for what?" Marcus paused. He knew exactly how to answer, yet he also knew he could not. Every detail of the operation remained protected information. "Time to avoid interfering with responsibilities that extend beyond this roadside," he replied carefully. Ryan shook his head. "That is not an answer." Marcus accepted the criticism without protest. Sometimes protecting another person's safety required enduring misunderstanding. He had learned that lesson long before this rainy evening. The dashboard clock inside the vehicle quietly advanced once more. 12 minutes remained before the scheduled transfer point. Marcus imagined the secure federal team preparing the receiving location, checking encrypted communications, reviewing contingency plans, and expecting his arrival within the narrow window established earlier that afternoon. Delays created questions. Longer delays created risk. Yet abandoning protocol would create consequences that reached even further. Emily stepped closer to Ryan and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "Everything we have checked so far is clean. Maybe we should make the federal call." Ryan glanced toward Marcus before lowering his voice. "Or maybe he knows exactly what to say because he has done this before." Emily frowned, but said nothing more. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds before another patrol vehicle slowed behind the existing cruisers, adding another set of flashing lights to the growing display along the interstate. Passing motorists continued to reduce speed, curious eyes following the unusual gathering of police vehicles. Marcus noticed several people holding phones against their windshields, recording from a distance without understanding what they were seeing. None of them knew a protected witness sat quietly only a few feet away. None of them knew that every additional minute placed months of careful planning under increasing pressure. Marcus folded his hands loosely in front of him, refusing to let frustration replace discipline. "Officer Cooper," he said one final time, "my request has remained the same from the beginning. Please verify my identity through the appropriate federal channel before making another decision." Ryan remained silent for a long moment. Rain dripped steadily from his sleeves as he stared at Marcus, weighing confidence against caution. Finally, he reached for the radio attached to his shoulder. Marcus felt a brief moment of hope, believing the verification request was finally coming. Instead, Ryan gave a different instruction entirely, requesting additional supervisory assistance to the location before any further action would be taken. Marcus slowly lifted his eyes toward the dark sky as another precious minute slipped away. Somewhere beyond the rain, the federal team was still waiting. Somewhere inside the vehicle, the protected witness remained hidden in complete silence. And on the quiet shoulder of an ordinary highway, two very different ideas of duty continued moving toward an unavoidable collision. The rain grew softer until it sounded less like weather and more like a slow heartbeat against the roof of the sport utility vehicle. No one spoke for several long moments. The flashing emergency lights continued their endless rhythm, bathing the wet pavement in alternating shades of blue and red that shimmered like reflections across a quiet lake. Marcus Ellison stood motionless beside his vehicle, his dark jacket growing heavier with rain, yet his expression never changed. Years earlier, an older Marshal had told him that the hardest part of the job was not facing danger. It was remaining patient when no one believed the truth. That lesson returned to him now with remarkable clarity. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the cloudy night sky before looking back at the officers surrounding him. There was frustration in the moment, but not anger. There was disappointment, but not resentment. He understood that assumptions could spread faster than facts, especially when people believed they already knew what they were seeing. Inside the vehicle, the protected witness remained perfectly still, honoring every instruction Marcus had given before they entered the city. The silence from the rear compartment spoke of trust, and Marcus refused to betray it. Officer Emily Sanders quietly stepped away from the others and stood near the shoulder, watching the steady stream of headlights pass through the rain. Something about the encounter no longer felt ordinary to her. Every document had checked out. Every answer Marcus had given had remained consistent. He had never raised his voice, never argued, never attempted to leave. Instead, he had repeated the same respectful request again and again. Verify through Federal Dispatch. Emily looked back toward Ryan Cooper, who remained focused on maintaining control of the stop, convinced that caution justified every additional delay. Marcus noticed the uncertainty crossing Emily's face and offered a small, reassuring smile that lasted only a moment. It was not the smile of someone trying to win an argument. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had spent an entire career trusting that truth eventually arrived, even when it was late. A cool breeze drifted across the interstate, carrying the scent of wet pine from the trees beyond the guardrail. The roadside suddenly felt strangely peaceful despite the flashing lights and waiting patrol cars. Marcus listened to the rain striking the hood of his vehicle and remembered another night years before, when his own training officer had chosen patience over assumption during a confusing encounter. That single decision had protected an innocent family from unnecessary fear. Marcus had never forgotten it. He wished the same patience could find its way here tonight. Somewhere inside the vehicle, the dashboard clock quietly advanced again. 11 minutes remained before the scheduled transfer point. Marcus knew the timeline better than anyone, yet he refused to allow urgency to change the way he treated the officers standing before him. Respect did not depend on receiving respect in return. It depended on character. Ryan finally walked back toward Marcus, his boots splashing through the shallow water gathered along the edge of the highway. Their eyes met once more beneath the steady rain. Neither man spoke immediately. Between them stretched only silence, flashing lights, and the weight of decisions that neither of them yet understood. The night itself seemed to pause, as though waiting for one simple choice that would change everything that followed. The quiet was broken not by raised voices, but by the distant hum of powerful engines approaching from the east. At first it blended with the sound of passing traffic, almost impossible to distinguish beneath the rain. Then one pair of headlights became 3, then 6, then an entire line of identical black sport utility vehicles moving with deliberate precision through the darkness. Their amber marker lights reflected across the wet highway as they slowed in perfect formation behind the city patrol cars. Every officer instinctively turned toward the convoy. Ryan Cooper narrowed his eyes, unsure what he was watching. Emily Sanders lowered her flashlight without realizing she had done so. The lead vehicle stopped, followed by the others in flawless sequence. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Rain continued falling in gentle waves while steam drifted upward from the warm pavement. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man in a dark federal rain jacket stepped out, his expression calm but unmistakably focused. Gold lettering across his chest reflected beneath the emergency lights. United States Marshal Service. Another federal agent exited from the passenger side carrying a secure communications case. 2 more agents quietly positioned themselves near the rear vehicles without displaying urgency or alarm. Their movements were disciplined, practiced, and almost silent. Ryan felt the certainty he had carried throughout the stop begin to weaken. The senior marshal walked directly toward Marcus Ellison without hesitation. As soon as he reached him, he stopped, nodded respectfully, and spoke in a steady voice that everyone nearby could hear. Deputy Marshal Ellison, we have been attempting to reach your secure channel for the last several minutes. Is the protected individual secure? Marcus answered with the same calm he had shown all evening. Yes, sir. The witness remains safe. The senior marshal gave a small nod before turning toward the city officers. I am Chief Deputy Daniel Brooks. Deputy Ellison has been conducting an authorized federal witness transport under sealed authority. The words settled over the roadside with remarkable weight. Ryan stared at Marcus, suddenly seeing the evening through an entirely different lens. The patient requests, the repeated appeals to contact Federal Dispatch, the refusal to reveal protected information. None of it had been an excuse. It had been procedure. Emily slowly exhaled, remembering every respectful answer Marcus had given despite the growing delay. Daniel Brooks accepted a secure tablet from another marshal and held it where Ryan could clearly read the federal authorization displayed on the encrypted screen. Every detail matched Marcus's statements. Every verification request he had made could have resolved the situation long before this moment. Ryan felt the rain against his face, but barely noticed it anymore. His attention remained fixed on Marcus, who neither smiled nor appeared satisfied. There was no trace of triumph in his expression, only quiet relief that the truth had finally arrived. Daniel Brooks looked back toward Marcus. "You handled this exactly as expected." Marcus answered simply, "The mission comes first." Brooks nodded once before glancing toward the dark rear compartment of the vehicle. "Then let us finish what we came here to do." Around them, the flashing lights still reflected across the rain-covered highway, but the atmosphere had completely changed. What had begun as suspicion now stood illuminated by undeniable truth, and for the first time that evening, every person on that roadside understood exactly who Marcus Ellison had been all along. For several seconds, no one moved. The rain continued its quiet rhythm across the highway while the flashing lights painted every raindrop with shifting shades of blue and red. Ryan Cooper lowered his eyes, the confidence that had carried him through the evening replaced by a silence he could not explain. The federal authorization displayed on the secure tablet remained unmistakably clear. Every request Marcus Ellison had made had been legitimate. Every opportunity to verify his identity had been available from the very beginning. Emily Sanders looked from Marcus to Chief Deputy Daniel Brooks, then back again. She finally understood why Marcus had never become defensive. He had trusted the process even when the process had failed him. Daniel Brooks closed the secure tablet and handed it back to one of the marshals before addressing the city officers in a calm voice. Deputy Ellison followed every federal protocol required for this assignment. He protected the witness, respected your authority, and repeatedly requested proper verification. No accusation followed those words. No anger. Only facts. Somehow that made them even heavier. Ryan slowly removed Marcus's driver's license from his jacket pocket and stepped forward. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he offered it back. "Deputy Ellison," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Marcus accepted the license without hesitation. Water dripped from the edge of his sleeve as he looked at Ryan with the same steady expression he had carried throughout the entire encounter. "Thank you," he replied. "Acknowledging a mistake takes courage." Ryan seemed surprised by the answer. He had expected frustration, perhaps disappointment, but not kindness. He looked down at the wet pavement before speaking again. "I believed I was protecting the public." Marcus nodded gently. "I believe you were trying to do your job." Ryan looked up, searching Marcus's face for any sign of resentment. He found none. "Then where did I go wrong?" Marcus paused for a moment, choosing his words with the same care he had shown all evening. "Caution is necessary," he said. "Assumptions are not. Verification protects everyone, including officers." Emily listened closely, committing every word to memory. Marcus continued, his voice calm enough that even the rain seemed to soften around it. "A badge represents authority. Character determines how that authority is used. When we allow conclusions to arrive before evidence, we stop seeing people clearly." Ryan slowly nodded. The lesson reached far beyond the roadside and far beyond that single evening. Chief Deputy Brooks glanced toward the waiting convoy before checking his watch. "We need to move," he said quietly. Marcus acknowledged him with a slight nod, then turned back to Ryan one final time. "You still have an opportunity tonight," Marcus said. "Learn from this moment. The next person you meet deserves the benefit of careful judgment, no matter who they are or what they look like." Ryan drew a slow breath. "I will remember that." Marcus offered a small smile, one built not on victory, but on understanding. Without another word, he walked toward his vehicle. The federal team quietly resumed their positions while the city officers stepped aside. Around them, the rain continued to fall with quiet patience, washing across the pavement as though reminding everyone present that even difficult moments could leave behind something clean, something lasting, and something worth carrying long after the storm had passed. The convoy pulled away from the shoulder with quiet precision, its headlights disappearing one by one into the rain until only the city patrol cars remained beneath the gray Virginia sky. The flashing emergency lights were switched off, and for the first time that evening the interstate returned to its ordinary rhythm. Passing vehicles no longer slowed to watch. The curious glances were gone. All that remained was the sound of tires crossing wet pavement and the gentle whisper of rain settling over the highway. Ryan Cooper stood beside his cruiser without speaking. The road looked exactly as it had an hour earlier, yet nothing felt the same. He replayed every moment in his mind, every request Marcus Ellison had made, every opportunity to verify the truth that had been placed in front of him. The answers had been there from the beginning. What had been missing was the willingness to pause long enough to listen. Emily Sanders walked over and quietly rested one hand against the roof of the patrol car. Neither officer felt the need to fill the silence. Sometimes the most important lessons arrived without another word. Several miles ahead, Marcus guided the sport utility vehicle toward the secure transfer location, where the waiting federal team completed the final stage of the operation exactly as planned. The protected witness stepped safely into another vehicle without cameras, without attention, and without fear. Marcus watched until the convoy disappeared through the security gate before allowing himself a slow breath. Another life had reached safety. Another promise had been kept. Chief Deputy Daniel Brooks approached him with a warm expression. "You handled yourself with remarkable professionalism tonight," he said. Marcus gave a modest smile. "The mission mattered more than my pride." Brooks nodded. "That is exactly why people trust you." Marcus looked toward the rain-covered parking lot where the reflections of distant lights shimmered across the pavement. "Respect is easiest when people agree with us," he replied softly. "The real test is showing respect when they do not." Brooks placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder for a brief moment before heading toward the operations building. Marcus remained outside alone. The rain had become little more than a fine mist drifting through the cool night air. Far away, Ryan finally climbed back into his patrol car, but did not start the engine immediately. Instead, he opened the small notebook he always carried beside the radio and wrote a single sentence across a blank page. "Verify before you judge." He closed the notebook slowly, knowing those 4 words would remain with him longer than any report he completed that night. Months later, a young officer riding with Ryan during a routine traffic stop suggested making a quick assumption about a nervous driver. Ryan quietly shook his head and answered with calm certainty. "We will verify first. Every person deserves that." The stop ended peacefully, and the driver thanked them before continuing home. Ryan watched the taillights disappear into the distance and thought of the patient deputy Marshal he had once misunderstood on a rainy highway. Somewhere else in America, Marcus Ellison continued serving people whose names would never appear in headlines, protecting strangers who would likely never know the sacrifices made on their behalf. He never spoke publicly about that night because, to him, the most meaningful victories were not measured by recognition. They were measured by lives protected, promises kept, and opportunities to replace assumption with understanding. Long after the storm had passed, the rain had washed every trace of flashing lights from the pavement, but it could never wash away the lesson that remained in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed what quiet integrity truly looked like.